Some associations focus so much on process that they lose sight of progress.
Are you working with a leader at an association who's so arrogant that they're not open to other thoughts, other ideas, other perspectives? Like, the first rule of growth is you can't do it alone.
You always say there's no shortage of ideas, and it's like best idea wins.
Don't get in front of your skis in terms of just starting to build, because if you don't have a big enough plan or a vision, it doesn't make sense.
I'm your host, KiKi L'Italien, and oh, wow. Okay, so today our guest has a lot of things that he has accomplished. He wears a lot of hats, and he's also, one of those hats includes being my CEO at Big Red M. Lucas McCann leads both Core Affinity and Big Red M. He can talk to us a little bit how those things are related. And he's someone who I've had the privilege of working alongside while watching his mind at work. Tricky, right? We're learning about leadership. We're learning about all kinds of interesting things. And Lucas is always sort of focused on what actually moves the needle for associations. So I thought it would be really interesting to have this conversation about what works. His approach isn't always about adding noise to the system. It's about helping teams cut through the noise. And so you may recognize him. You may recognize his voice. You may recognize his appearance through his podcast, 6 Degrees of Associations, where he has candid conversations that help association professionals think smarter and act bolder. And yes, even grow stronger. So with all of that, I am going to bring Lucas to the stage. Hi, Lucas. Hey.
Hello.
How did your entrepreneurial spirit lead you into the association world, and why? And it's been more than 2 decades now. We were talking about this yesterday. What's kept you here? You got to the association space. What kept you here? So how did you get here in the first place?
So going way back, my father was an entrepreneur. He started many, many businesses throughout his career. My mom, in a lot of ways, was an entrepreneur as well while she was raising my brothers and I. I tell people we were flipping houses before it was a cool thing to do on television. So we thought that was very entrepreneurial. It was, we didn't build out a lot of plans. It was just a lot of doing. And so I got to grow up with that. My first jaunt into associations, I was selling affinity programs at an organization. We were in a call center and I was talking to members, and I just remember thinking, this is the warmest sales call I've ever been on. We'd call up, hey, KiKi, I want to tell you about ABC and the benefits that you have through your membership. And you expect a click, and they would say, that's great. I've been meaning to talk to you. Like, tell me more. And there's a moment where you're like, wait, was it really that easy? Well, it continued. And so I quickly realized, wow, I had a lot of other friends and colleagues who were in different sectors that were calling their friends, or they were picking up the phone book, and there wasn't much guidance, and it wasn't very warm from a sales perspective. I felt like what I was doing was very unique. And so that was the initial hook. In that organization, I got to jump around a little bit, and I realized soon that was my plan. I wanted to understand how this machine worked as a company, but also still staying in this segment of associations, right? There was something warm, inviting, powerful, meaningful. Everybody seemed to really like what they do. And so that kept me in the organization. So then the business part of it was, okay, I want to understand marketing. I want to understand the data. I want to understand the analysis. I want to understand the operations. I want to understand the finances. And I jumped around quite a bit in that tenure. And I got to a point where I felt like I could leap and say, I think I can do this. Now, as most things, you leap out of the nest, you fall straight to the ground, and you bounce twice and you're dead. But I did that too. I failed coming out of that and learned a lot. I tell people I got a lot of scars from all the things that I've done wrong. And I ask people on my show, like, hey, tell us about mistakes that you've made. And I could make a whole show out of that. But that actually got me enthusiastic about doing it more and being more open to mistakes and making wrong choices sometimes, but making choices.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things, it's You always say there's no shortage of ideas, and it's like best idea wins. That's
Yeah.
another thing that gets brought up all the time. And so, with that, I know that there are a lot of people who they bring up this idea of wanting to focus on just a few things and really niche down, but then they lose out on some of the bigger ideas. And then there are those who go way too broad and they try to do too many things. When we're looking at, and you're looking at building out a business, building out a company, and there's no shortage of ideas, but there's also, you're starting with one particular thing. How do you decide how to grow? How do you decide which ideas to take on? I mean, it has to be a struggle because, there are a number of different businesses that you work with. And I don't know, I honestly don't know how you figure this out, where to grow all the time. So I'm really wildly curious to find out how you're going to answer this question.
It's a lot of listening. What does the market need? Both what it says it needs and what it actually needs.
Mm-hmm.
What are the people we have around us really good at and also really passionate about? I think that's like a really important intersection of what do we want to do and what are we good at? And so
Right.
you have to find the little Venn diagram middle of those two sometimes, because sometimes things that you want to do, you're not very good at, but it sounds exciting, right? And
Yeah.
then what do associations in this case really need, and how can we help them? What are their own blind spots? What are their gaps? And you've also heard me talk a lot about growth, right? And we put on our healthy things grow. We
Right.
want to grow. If you're not growing, you're dying. All growth ends. Like, these are all things and mantras that we live by internally and talk about quite often. But growth is hard too. And so that's its own opportunity in terms of how we can have an impact on associations and help them navigate the right way to grow.
You said in the past that some associations focus so much on process that they lose sight of progress. How can leaders better balance operational discipline with momentum?
You have to start bigger. I mean, big red M, part of its big is, right, it's not small red M. We jokingly say that. You have to start big. You have to think bigger. We have in the headquarters here, we have a thing on the wall that says, think big.
Yeah.
Um, the reason is too many people start building processes, but don't really know where they're headed. It's like, I can't give you directions unless you tell me where you're going, sort of thing, like head south. That's a big spectrum. Like, where specifically do we want to go, and what does that take? And until you really know all of that, which is its own challenge, right? Making people, convincing them, setting a vision that's big enough, right? One of the questions I always ask and maybe you'll giggle at this too, is, okay, what would you do with $1 million? If I gave it to you, if I dropped it in front of your lap, right? What would you do with that? And most associations go, I put it in this or that. No, maybe. Now, what if I gave you $10 million? Or you'll say, what would it look like to grow by 5x your membership over the next 10 years? Some will go, that can't happen. I go, well, hold on. What if, and here's another silly example I'll often use, like, what if we bought a 3-minute ad at the Super Bowl? Well, okay, if we're going to spend that type of money. Okay, so now it is possible, right? Okay, so we're starting to think bigger. And then once we've got a vision that we can share and we can communicate that we believe is plausible, then
Mm-hmm.
you can start building your path towards that step at a time. You still have to recognize that the whole mantra, like, people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but they underestimate what they can do in 10. And so if you really take the longer view, more things become possible. And then at the right moments within that journey, you build and you systematize. But don't get in front of your skis in terms of just starting to build, because if you don't have a big enough plan or a vision, it doesn't make sense.
What are some of the leading indicators that show whether an association or any kind of organization is truly growing or just looking busy?
I, I kind of always want to point things back to the leadership. I've
Mhm.
learned earlier and earlier in an engagement whether growth is possible.
Mhm.
And there's a few things. So one, and by the way, us as leaders also have to look at ourselves in the mirror and put ourselves through this same lens of, do we have blind spots in these areas? But the first is arrogance.
Yeah.
Are you working with a leader at an association who's so arrogant that they're not open to other thoughts, other ideas, other perspectives? Like the first rule of growth is you can't do it alone. It doesn't
Yeah.
happen because you didn't really grow. I mean, if you were by yourself 20 years later, what grew? I mean, you personally may have grown, like your knowledge base may have grown. I get that, but the organization didn't grow if it's just you.
Yeah.
And so there is an element of people, revenue, impact, all of that, right? But if you're so arrogant to believe that you know the only way to do it, you'll never get as far as you want to get, and that's arrogance. The second is probably ignorance. You
Mhm.
only know what you know, and so also if you're not continuing to learn and study and be a lifelong learner about what is the market saying, it goes back to listening. Is what are people saying? I have to learn more about what it is that people need. Again, there's two sides of that, what they say they need and what they actually need. And you constantly need to be thinking about how you can marry those two. It's like the essence of sales. It's like, I can't sell you something unless you want it, or I know you want it and I just have to explain to you why. It's one of those things.
Mhm.
But ignorance is big. If they don't know why a solution might be the right one for them, that's a very difficult barrier to get through for growth. And you may not grow with that partnership and that relationship. Third is simply just a resistance to change. I could call that fear of the unknown. It's too risky.
Mhm.
The old adage, it takes money to make money. And I know associations don't like to talk about money. So you could exchange that for value. Like it takes value to make value, but value is not free. Like that's the secret, right? You have to build and invest in something in order for it to grow. And often ahead of time, it's not, oh, let's build something and we can take all of the profits and revenue that we make from that and then we can reinvest it. Well, no, you have to do that right from the beginning, and that process has to continue throughout the entire journey. That's what it takes to grow. And so that resistance is really different. And that's probably the hardest one to overcome. If
Mhm.
somebody has gotten to a point where they're so resistant to change, I'm not sure we can change. You don't change people, right? Especially if they're in that mindset of, no, I just kind of want to stay where I'm at. I'm good. I like this number of members. I like the programs we have. They're working. To which I'd also suggest to myself when I'm having that conversation with them, you're not really growing. If you're growing enough to meet attrition, you're actually overall not growing.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
you're just staying in the same spot. That's not actually growth. Imagine if a tree just stayed in the same spot. Yeah, it didn't grow.
I love this. It feels kind of like we're having one of our discussions anyway, like one of our
Aren't
meetings.
we?
I mean, we kind of are, right? We're just inviting other people to watch. But yeah, so like I'm asking you to put sort of your sort of strategic selling hat on. Like you have an interesting perspective, I think. From my observations on the ways that sales and building relationships really interact for associations. And I don't get a chance to actually, or I don't think most people get a chance to actually hear your thoughts about the sales conversation that association leaders should be having that they're not. Um, Asking, poking that a little bit.
Okay.
What do you think is the sales conversation that association leaders should be having or be thinking about that they're not?
I think right now the conversation is trust. Do members, suppliers trust what we say we're doing? Do they trust that an investment in this association is the right path for them and their business? And do they trust that the association is going to deliver value? Too often, the association is too removed from the membership. I mean, this is why in-person, I'll just go here for a second, but this is why in-person meetings will never die, and I believe will always have the biggest impact and value, is being physically with somebody and close to them builds trust that you just couldn't. If we had only met over video, KiKi, we wouldn't have the same level of trust and relationship. And if you sit in the big box in the sky as the association, and you push everything digitally and you do everything over Zoom, and you never go meet and really learn what's happening with your members, and I guess it goes back to more listening mostly, you'll never build the trust to understand. You might continue putting programs out. They might be the wrong programs. Or you may continue putting messages out. It may be messages that fall on deaf ears because it wasn't really what they were looking for. And so that trust value equation, I think, as it relates to sales, is big. How do you sell somebody something that doesn't trust you?
For association chat, I like to live stream the interviews, right? And part of that is because occasionally when people are watching, they write in or they comment or ask their questions. And LinkedIn user, I can't see who you are, but said, great to have a discussion about entrepreneurship and association. So thank you for commenting. I think that's really great. I'm going to actually let that guide us into maybe some questions that people have that are know who you are, know about maybe Core Affinity or Big Red M, and are curious about your take on what we're seeing as far as the developments that are happening in the association sector, because there's definitely Big Red M's been, in acquiring some stuff and kind of growing. There's a lot of growth in the association industry. What are your thoughts on that? Because, from the entrepreneurial perspective, it's been kind of interesting to watch over the last, I'd argue over the last 10 plus years, but, I'm curious what you think.
Yeah. So there's always been this notion that associations are 10 years behind the curve, right? Whether you're talking about technology, marketing, anything that is otherwise corporate, right? You feel like the big businesses, they can move quickly. They have these funds. There's less red tape. There's less rule by committee. And so in that sense, it's a great opportunity as an entrepreneur in the association space. We can move quickly, which only adds more value to a relationship with an association who may not be able to move as quickly, but could benefit from some of the products, resources, services of an organization who can. And so we can quickly get up to speed on something like AI. You talk a lot about, you're an expert. We could get up to speed so much faster on something like that and be a resource to an association who may not have that in their programming budgets for the next 24 months, may not have the staff or the bandwidth to go out and learn. I'll just say maybe ignorant on the subject and doesn't have the bandwidth to go study. But we can partner with somebody like that who could really benefit from somebody who's sort of closer to the cutting edge and bring them along and partner together. Like, that's where entrepreneurship and associations is a perfect fit, in my opinion. Now, you still have all the challenges of, hey, we got to get through the agreement. Let's meet again in 6 months to see if this passes my executive committee and all of that, which is the frustrating part of being an entrepreneur in associations. It never moves as quickly as you want it to, but you got to have a little bit of patience or just bite a stick and wait. But it's a great opportunity as an entrepreneur to do those type of things.
Yeah. Sometimes, I have to say, for association executives who have been in the staff and they for associations, and they haven't they haven't been entrepreneurs themselves, but they've just watched who's on the expo hall floor at ASE annual, or like who's showing up and offering different services, and who sticks around, and who builds those relationships, and who just seems to be in and out. And it's something that they're experimenting with. I think that it can be kind of dizzying to watch, those different circles, and the evolution over the years, and kind of fascinating to see who really understands that relationship game, and how associations and the association industry is maybe a little bit different than some others as far as the way that the relationships go. Although, is the association industry any different, Lucas? I mean, what do you think?
Well, it is an interesting landscape when you talk about, looking out the ASE floor, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You've met one entrepreneur, you've met one entrepreneur. Like, can we just change that whole thing about associations? Because they're all at different stages. They all have their own personalities. They all have their own driving factors. They all have their own motivations.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier stage, and they all have their own arrogance, ignorance, and resistance to change, right? So all of those factors mixed in to say maybe an earlier stage, mid-size organization like ours, we're still very much like growth minded, right? We think 20 years out into the future. We have no intent to sell. Like, we want to bring on more services and products that can be where we can be the experts and the leading authority for associations as a growth partner. That's the way we think. Now, there are other organizations, and I'm not saying good or bad. It's just stages, right? There are other organizations who've maybe been around a little bit longer. You look at them, you see them as something similar, but their motivations are totally different. They may be closer to an exit. Their motivations are, I'm ready to just kind of get it to it where it needs to be, so my balance sheet looks so pretty and nice, and I'm actually pulling funds off of this more than, more of a lifestyle business than I am looking to reinvest and grow and continue to expand in all the right ways. And then there's others who've already gone through the whole exercise that are on the private equity side of the bundle, and hey, we're just the big guys, and take it or leave it. Here's our product or service. I'm painting some very broad strokes here, and I hope nobody gets offended by that. But those are also generalities as it relates to stages, but you kind of get a sense. I mean, very well, maybe more than most, when you look across the ASE floor, who's sort of where in that journey, who they are as a personality. And I'd encourage, the associations to get to know those brands a little bit more before you jump in bed because they have a shiny new presentation.
Well, we have another LinkedIn user that asked, or it may be the same one, I'm not sure, who asked this question: how can associations get the support of board members for entrepreneurship, risk-taking, partnerships, etc.? And that's a really interesting question. I'm curious to know your thoughts on that one, because for associations, a lot of association leaders, they need to be thinking more in a more entrepreneurial way. They need to have that mindset, but they don't always work with or have the supportive board, or maybe, other internal staff for some of this risk taking that comes along in the territory with, we need to grow, we need to change, we need to, adapt to the environment that we're in. So what do you say? I mean, what are some of the ways that they can get that support?
Well, I saw the question and immediately started thinking of, the dog and the tail, and who's wagging who.
Yeah.
So it depends. Crappy answer, I know, but it really depends. Is the association leadership looking to accomplish something, and the board support is what gets them to accomplish that goal? In that sense, yes. If you're an entrepreneurial leader in an association, you need an entrepreneurial board who understands what you're trying to do and maybe isn't resistant to the change that you want to create. If your board is resistant to change because they think it's going to impact their business, they don't understand what you're doing, or they believe their thoughts and ideas are better than yours, nothing's going to happen, right? So they're going back to the arrogance, ignorance, and resistance to change or fear. You have to have a board that has that type of alignment as an entrepreneur, if that's your goal. Now, if you're an association leader and your goal is to just stick, you may have the inverse. If you have a board that wants you to start pushing things and growing things, and they see a benefit to the industry and maybe their individual organization, if you as a leader were start to do those things, I'd start really asking myself or looking myself in the mirror going, do I have a board that wants to grow? And is that what I want to do or not? But it's so key.
Yeah.
The membership is also part of that conversation. Does the membership understand that it needs to grow, that you want it to grow? And if so, why? And that goes back to, being a good leader also requires you to be a good communicator. And so telling that story up and down the ladder of here's where we're going to grow. And here's, most importantly, here's why. And here's how it's going to benefit you. Those elements have got to be part of the conversation, again, if you want to be that entrepreneurial leader in associations.
What have you learned from listening to these stories about what absolutely, what is the best thing? What are some of the best ways that associations can take their sales efforts and really grow? And what are the things that hinder them and get in their way from really nailing it, from doing a good job and being more successful?
So I'll take this from two perspectives. One is if you're an association and you're staffing this, and as I say this out loud, maybe they're not too dissimilar, but let's start with you're staffing your business development, right? Let's talk about it from that perspective. Some of the challenges, let's start there. Some of the challenges is you start communicating before you actually listened or paid attention to qualitative or quantitative metrics. Quantitative meaning, what are people actually attending? Where are they spending their money? Following the engagement, right? That's number one. Number two, the qualitative. What are they actually telling you that they want out of the association? Or have you talked to them? It seems novel.
Have you talked to them?
Communicate with them. Yes. And then going back to listen. Some of them will start pushing out information about value before they've understood what people want. That's a big mistake. And so that actually leads us to opportunities where we go in and do an engagement on just a value prop review, right? We've done a number of these where it's like, hey, let's actually do some sentiment studying, some surveying. Let's talk to people. Let's help you look at the data and let's benchmark this and let's really get a better understanding of where the value is. Then you can start communicating, proportionally, accordingly on what's going to drive the most value from what they hear from you. So I would say one of the biggest mistakes is they start talking before they start listening. Like, shocker, that's like a leadership faux pas anyway. From a fractional standpoint, so again, maybe not too dissimilar, but we're going to go back to some earlier stuff. In our partnerships, because I had the opportunity to do this last year, we started doing this presentation and listening to our account executives and listening to each other, right? It's not just me listening. Everybody's literally in the room listening to what makes a great relationship in this market and what doesn't. So again, we're sitting through the lens of a fractional relationship, which I think has become more and more prevalent. I think, again, you're getting an expert, but you're getting a team with Big Red M, because literally our account executives are bringing the issues of the associations to a dozen or more people who've all been in the industry for 10 plus years. And so you get the brainstorming, the problem solving of an entire team through a single resource. So with that, here's the challenge on that. What doesn't happen sometimes is they don't actually value that relationship. They're not actually ingrained. They're not included. They're not brought in and embraced as a real consultant, a real expert, a real resource. And I'm very forward in telling people on the front end of this engagements, as you know, we're not a smile and dial call center. If you just want somebody to call 10,000 people, like, that's not what we do. Um,
Mhm.
we do communicate and we do drive a lot of new business and revenue, whether it's membership or sponsorships or exhibits or fill in the blank, and we can help you with all of that. But that's not the best utilization. And we can bring a lot more to the table than just that. And here's why you need that. Now,
Yeah.
some of the best relationships, this is also kind of silly. Like we wrote up boards last year. Here's what makes it the most challenging. Here's what makes a great relationship or development. And it was just the inverse. So in the inverse, it was, hey, we do listen to our members and we do take down information and we do look at the quantitative and qualitative data and adjust our course and direction for prospecting and renewals and new members based on what we're actually listening, what we hear, what we see.
Yeah.
And then inversely, what makes a great relationship are associations who bring in fractional resources who are supposed to be the experts, give them a seat at the table and listen to them. Hey, what are you actually hearing? What have people told you? What are you observing? Because our folks have done this for dozens of other groups. And so they inherently know how this compares to others. So if we come in and we go, hey, there's an issue here because this isn't doing nearly as well as my other accounts, you should listen to that. Now, if
Yeah.
you're too arrogant, we're going back to this. I feel like I'm bringing up these three a lot, but if you're too arrogant to believe that, you're not going to grow. It's not going to work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and I also am remembering what was on that board, and it ties back to something we were talking about earlier, which is trust. And it was talking about that relationship between being, and that was from the perspective of how you work with your partners, right? And we noticed that there was more growth, more success, more revenue, more all of this stuff, and the best and happiness, right? The best overall experience with working together came from that trust, which I think is really fascinating that the dollars match the trust, right?
Mhm.
It's kind of interesting. I don't know if it's 100% like that, but it was for that, group of examples. So it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, maybe we need to start adding that to the beginning of our engagements also, that just a checkbox is like, if you don't trust us, don't hire us.
I mean,
Like maybe as simple as that.
it'd be
Like,
an interesting thing to
I
do.
wouldn't want to work for somebody who didn't trust me. Like, why would I
Yeah,
go through all the effort of giving you recommendations and solutions if you weren't going to trust the results? Like, we're dead from the beginning.
right, right. It's interesting, Lucas. I think we need to revisit this on our next weekly meeting, or maybe actually when we have the mid-year strategic. So
I
LinkedIn
agree.
user,
It may come up naturally.
it may just come up organically.
And or maybe it already has. I mean, I'm looking back through some of those things again. I'm flashing back to some of our, giant Post-it boards on the wall, thinking through these elements is like, maybe they just didn't trust us. maybe we, I'm not
Maybe
going to point
that's what
fingers.
happened.
I'm bigger on
Yeah.
pointing thumbs than I am fingers. Like maybe we didn't do a good enough job building a relationship of trust
Yeah.
on the front end. And so it wasn't going to work out from the beginning. And we failed to recognize that early on and do things differently. But
Okay.
that's a great example of, hey, we failed. Let's learn from that. We'll do better on the next one.
Wheels turning on this one. Not crazy. Like wheels. No, never mind.
The wheels are always
Okay.
turning. I get it.
So LinkedIn user, the mysterious LinkedIn user, this is William. We know you, William. William said from
We do
me,
know William.
actively listening to hi William, actively listening to sponsors and or exhibitors pain points and communicating that to the association can bring about new creative sales opportunities that both parties, sponsor and association, will be happy with. Yeah, excellent point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a great question at the beginning of those engagements for sponsorships, and I don't remember who said it. I'm gonna miscredit on. I'm not going to be able to apply credit to whoever said this, unfortunately, but I won't take credit myself. Was a simple question on the front end of, why are you doing this?
Mhm.
Why are you sponsoring this event? Because the answer is all over the place. Some people just throw out the prospectus. Here's what's available, and never ask the question, why would you want to buy a banner? Why would you want to, sponsor the cocktail hour? Why are you doing any of this with the association? Now, it can seem off-putting the way that I just put that, but what you're really getting at is there's an underlying reason that you need to know and listen to understand and to really know why the sponsorship is even an opportunity in the first place, but also how you could make it more special. I'll call it, have a greater impact. Some want to sponsor because, hey, we just rebranded and I just want to get our logo out there. And we can say, well, this isn't actually the best way to get your logo. If you're just looking to get your new logo because you love it, there's actually these other opportunities. Or maybe we should just create something for you that just plasters your logo really all over the wall in lights for, like, you know, the party or something like that. Or I'm making stuff up. Some of them say, I'm really just looking for new business. Some say, I want to sponsor because we have this new product out and I'm looking to get it in front of people. And right, so there's just a whole myriad of reasons that if you don't ask and you don't listen, you can't really get to the real value.
Okay. And now we have the other mysterious LinkedIn user. That's the thing, is sometimes if you don't like grant StreamYard certain information or like rights to see who you are, you're just LinkedIn user.
I was this far away from giving Bruce the credit for that question, because it actually still may have been him. I actually was thinking about him. I was like, I think it was Bruce way back when that said, you got to ask your sponsors, like, why are you doing this? Or like understand at a next level why somebody would want to spend money with this group at this time. So that's very fortuitous that Bruce commented. Yeah.
And I do want to give a little shout out to Bruce too, while we're on the topic. Hi, Bruce. He has a book that's coming out, and you can sign up on the wait list. And I had the good fortune of being able to look at it. Thank you, Bruce. That was a great honor. And so, anyway, I just want to give an early shout out. You'll be hearing about it more when it's more widely available, but you can get yourself added to that wait list. So definitely do that. But anyway, so Bruce was saying, great point. Trust leads to happiness and success, which is better partnerships with members, service providers, sponsors. You've built a culture of accountability and innovation across multiple companies, Lucas. What have you learned about leadership that associations should adopt to stay relevant?
What's really important in our culture as an organization, I think we do a good job of holding to it, is supporting each other and knowing each other at more than a superficial level.
Yeah.
We ask people to be vulnerable in the right settings, right? We're not going to tell people to tell us their deepest, darkest secret in a group setting, but we make it a point to get together. We make it a point to be in person, even though we are a distributed workforce. We're all over the country, but it's important to do that. And it's important to talk about more than business, because we get to know each other at a level that's beyond business, if that's a thing. Just at a very personal, like I feel like our personal and business lives are intertwined in a way where it feels comfortable enough to ask about personal items if it makes sense. I'm not prying at people's personal items, and nobody else is, but through the lens of care and consideration and support, we ask each other very personal questions sometimes because we care about each other. And I think the association, that's an opportunity. It will build trust that will allow you to have very difficult conversations, which are important. And if you don't have difficult conversations, that's also a limiting factor for growth. As we all know, there are points within the growth journey that aren't easy, and we have to make changes. People have to move seats. We move direction. We say we're going in one direction, and hey, because of this, we have to pivot. Growth is hard, and it's not just this like fun curve up and to the right. It's a windy road. And so without that, I feel like it would be almost impossible to have the conversations and allow people the ability to express themselves about how they really feel. Like, hey, I'm struggling with this. Like, this is a big change. Can we talk about this? Rather than, if you don't have that, the natural inclination might be turn and run. This isn't for me.
Yeah.
And so I'd hope that anybody within our organizations would come to me and say, I'm really struggling with this, and I want to talk about this. Maybe it's not to me, maybe it's another leader in the organization, but before somebody would just cut and run because they felt like they were in an area they weren't happy with, or they were questioning something about our direction, our mission, our intent, anything, that they would have that conversation with somebody, because it's a community of trust.
People ask that question all the time. And thanks for tying that back for people, because I didn't work that back to like how this ties to associations. But yeah, the big question about like, can we work remotely and build the team, and can we still have those conversations and feel like and you can, right? You can. It may not be easy, and yeah, people will be, does it scale well? And but you can figure it out. It can happen. Thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for joining me today.